So the first topic of this tutorial is masking, and masking by itself isn't very complex, but I'll also talk about a few techniques that can help you when you're masking. So to get started masking, let's just click on our footage in the timeline and then hit the G key, and that'll enable our pen tool. And so let's just mask out Terry right here. Let's zoom in. And to start masking, you just do it pretty similar to how you do it in Vegas. You just start clicking and holding left mouse button to enable your Bezier handles. A really quick addendum to this is if you had like multiple layers and you just wanted to view one or mask just a single one, you can double click on that layer and that'll open it in its own panel where you can then mask it from here as well. And this is useful for when you have like effects applied to a layer, but all you want to see is the layer itself without those effects applied. So coming back to the actual masking, we're just gonna mask out his face really quick right here. Alright, so now that we've done that, you should see this new masks area in your timeline for your layer. If you don't for some reason, you can hit the M key while that layer is selected and it'll show all the masks you've created. So if we click on this drop down, we'll see the properties of our mask. So we have the path of it, the feather of the mask, which we can change by just dragging these values, the opacity of the mask, and also the expansion of it, which we can change. And also you can set what type of mask this is, so you can set it to like subtract. These other options, intersect, lighten, darken, etc., are useful for when you have multiple masks on your layer. You can always invert those mask types as well. And all four of these parameters are keyable. So let's say we wanted to key the mask. We would just click on the mask path. Then we can just drag down the timeline. And then let's say we wanted to move this mask a little bit. We can press Control T. We can just drag that over a little bit and then hit enter. You can see that our mask is now animated along with that. So let's quickly mask another part of him. So I'll just set the mask mode to none so we can see what we're doing here in the viewport. So let's try masking his forearm here. And there's a specific reason that I'm masking just his forearm that I'll explain in a second. Alright, so now that we have his forearm masked, let's also set that to none. Now let's say we wanted to animate this mask path as well. So let's enable that and just scrub back. Create another keyframe there. So you see his forearm, it hasn't really shifted that much up here, but it has more down here. One way we can account for that or make it easier when we're animating our mask is if we press Control T. We have this little anchor point in the center right now, but we're just gonna move it up here by dragging it. And then we can just rotate this mask, get it around his arm, and you'll see that's pretty much where it should be. We may have to adjust these points and these points a little bit, but we have his hand pretty much where it should be. So we'll just press enter, and we'll just click and drag these points, hold shift and select these. Just drag those in a little bit. Get these ones. We'll hit add and see how that looks. So it looks like we may have to create another keyframe around here. Set that back to none, Control T. Do the same thing, drag our anchor point up there. Just rotate it. Just a few of these points. That looks good. And so you see we already have masked a good chunk of frames from this, and we can always adjust it with the feather options. You can change the expansion a little bit, expand it out. And of course we can always go back and tweak this pretty easily. So that's about it for masking, really. There isn't too much to cover in that. Masking can be a pretty deep topic on its own, so it might be something I'll cover more in depth later, but for now this is just the basics that will definitely get you started. So next topic is gonna be track mats. So in order to explain track mats, we're gonna have to drag in another piece of footage here. So we're just gonna drag in this image I have with this transparent background. Scale it up. And so let's just say, for example, we want this Old Spice footage below to be using this image as a mat for it. So in our timeline, we'll see this option for track mat, and if you don't see this, make sure you have both of these two options enabled down here, specifically the second one. So you'll see this track mat option. You'll have these 4 options: alpha mat, inverted alpha mat, luma mat, and luma inverted mat. Alpha mat is going to take the alpha or transparency information of the layer above and use that as a mat. So if we click on that, as you can see, whatever part of that image is transparent, it's going to cut it out and just show the parts that are not transparent, essentially. Inverted mat is going to do the opposite of that. The parts that aren't transparent are going to be cut out or masked out. Luma mat does the same thing, except it's taking the luma information of the image. So essentially any bright parts are going to be kept and any dark parts are going to be masked out. And if we do invert, it's going to do the opposite of that. So that's a pretty basic feature. You can get a lot of interesting effects with that. The one thing to note is when you use a track mat, the layer you're using as a mat always has to be above the layer you set the mat on. And there is a way we can work around this later with an effect called set mat, but we'll get into that when we start talking about effects. And also when you set a layer as a track mat, it's going to turn off its visibility. So let's say we turn this layer visibly back on. You're going to see it's essentially just like you overlay the two. But technically underneath it is still being masked out. Just the layer above that it's using as a mat is no longer visible. So let's just turn that off now. So the last topic in this video is blending modes, and if we click on the mode drop down here, we're going to see all these different blending modes we have, a lot more than Vegas has. So some of these are the same as Vegas, some of them are new, some of them behave slightly different, I think. So a lot of these have specific technical usages a lot of the time, but for now you can just play around with these and see what kind of interesting effects you can get with them. Add is going to add the RGB values of the pixels. Difference is going to invert those. Subtract is going to subtract the RGB value of the pixels. Multiply will multiply the value. A lot of these are kind of self-explanatory, and some of them you may have to look up what exactly they do. So this tutorial is pretty short. These 3 topics can get pretty deep on their own, but the basics of them are pretty simple to understand. So in the next tutorial, we'll quickly talk about parenting layers and what we can do with that.